So in my process, I found this place of doing like Anna Marie suggests, of honestly letting go of all fear, releasing literally and actually the spirit of fear, to measure and weigh God's presence within me and what is God's will for my life. Not what group do I want to support, not what view do I want to support, not what media outlet do I want to support, not how much I hate this certain media or I don't like that certain media, but what is God governing me to do?
Aina, how do you deal with fear? And I mean, not necessarily fear that you experience, but in your intercessory role, in prayer with people, when fear is expressed to you, how do you deal with that? What's your way to deal with that and
Well,
help people?
actually, it's quite different, and you'll probably chuckle, but and Larry will too, because we both, as you know, as Grace Healing, it's a blessing to see that rise, that we can release it into God's embrace, because
Exactly.
it's not meant for us to hold on to. That goes back to seeking God first. And as you experience what that fear is, because really the opposite of fear is what? Love. It's security. It's and the many times. So for me, when you mention that, it's very simple. However, there are many that we have spoken about that aren't awakened to that, an awareness of God's grace that's upon their life, to recognize that we have been given the authority upon this earth, just as God has said, because he's within us, to release those captives. To me, that is so freedom, that I don't have to stress out or have striving to go with the route of, oh God, what am I going to do? What are we going to have to do with this? We've been hearing all this, instead of just centering upon God's presence and releasing it into his embrace. To me, that is so simple. However, I don't want to disrespect others that aren't awake to that. And that's a prime example of why we're here. Grace Healing, just we're not the norm that set the path of most ministries. It's just unique and special. Not that the other ones aren't, but we touch on things that many do not. And that's where we need to focus. And that's why I'm so grateful that we're on these calls like this. So when you ask about fear, it's an easy release. It may take me a couple of times, but I know and recognize what it is, because I've chosen to seek God first.
There we go. And
Simple.
what I'm hearing, Aina, is that we need to be able to recognize first and foremost before we can release it, right? We need to
Awareness of it, yeah.
exactly.
And
So
understanding this, exactly. Yep.
if we don't do
Exactly.
that, we can't release it. So in other words, here we have a chaotic environment around us, be it in the personal life or be it in the world situation, whatever. We need to not embrace it, but we need to recognize it. We need to acknowledge it, right? Don't we? Before we can actually do something about it.
Well, in my personal opinion, we we do have the opportunity to recognize it, but we don't give it onus over it. We don't give it power over us. We recognize it as an opportunity of release. We recognize it as an opportunity to surrender it and let it go. We recognize it long enough as an instrument of revelation, not something that defines us. There is but one thing in creation that defines us, that is God. The problem is we veil that by our willingness to embrace judgment against another, or anger for somebody not making the same decision we do, or lack of understanding to the fact that one group over here is seeing science that supports their view. One group over here is seeing science that supports their view. So if I understand the perfection of God, I have to look at that in totality, saying, wait a minute, there are people that are feeling totally convicted in one direction, and there are people feeling totally convicted in another direction. If I can approach that without judgment and just go, The way that they're being led is different than I. The way that they're being guided is different than I. I can see some of them are being governed by certain spiritual veils, especially the veil of fear, because the spiritual process within humanity right now is found its hot button, and its hot button is fear. It can push so deeply upon that fear to make people move in a direction that they would not normally head toward if it wasn't for this fear tool that they were wielding. So in my process, I found this place of doing like Anna Marie suggests, of honestly letting go of all fear, releasing literally and actually the spirit of fear, to measure and weigh God's presence within me and what is God's will for my life. Not what group do I want to support, not what view do I want to support, not what media outlet do I want to support, not how much I hate this certain media or I don't like that certain media, but what is God governing me to do? Not the world. What is my responsibility in revealing God's nature within this setting? Am I supposed to bring fear to this and fearmonger the situation into a certain direction that Larry thinks he should do? No, I'd rather instruct people to search God within themselves first so that they would know their path before presence of God. I'm not led to do certain things. They might be led to do certain things because they will hold a role within that divine view that I was talking about, where God's looking upon them and seeing that they have been able to embrace certain knowledge that I can see within me that does not come of truth. But they're still playing a role in the spiritual restoration, the healing of the spiritual realm. Yeshua said, you will see the new heaven and the new earth before the completion of this generation. He was talking about the generation of humanity. And if we look into that, we recognize that each person is playing a role because we go to the divine view, not the fears that we hold within a human view, but the overall picture to go that, wait a minute, even though my brother chooses a different direction than I do, I can still stand in love for him. I can pray for him in love. I can pray for increase of wisdom, clarity, and understanding for the nature of his place within the divine process because God is perfect. And we humans entered into this human veil of earthly walk and earthly journey to specifically bring healing to the spiritual realm. So if Yeshua again said that every single thing we see of corruption manifests first upon the earth from the spiritual realm, the order of principalities, then we have to remember that we have a part in that. And if my role is to lovingly support somebody and then they decide that, oh, based upon the things that I've experienced and I've gained through my earthly seeking of understanding, and I've allowed for the winds of the earth to move me into this decision, my one concern is that they would reach out and we engage in prayer, join together in prayer, that it would be blessed of God, not of the fears of man. Let's move this to a place that God can magnify it for his glory, not a place that you hold it in fear and judgment against others. That's just what I'm led to offer.